All right, looks like it's slowing down. All right, let's do it. Today we're going to be talking about Gatsby 4, like we talked about. Gatsby 4 is still in beta. It will be soon released in general availability. You can check it out today, though. You can head to the homepage at gatsbyjs.com and download the beta preview right now. But Gatsby 4 comes with a ton of new stuff. We're going to be talking about a lot of it today. Definitely our new page rendering methods. Joel is going to walk us through some of the server-side rendering and deferred static generation work we've done. Then we're going to talk a little bit about parallel query running and kind of the multi-threading we did on the build side, as well as our deploy infrastructure that you may have seen really drop time in. And then we're also going to be talking a little bit about content sync and how we reconstructed how we work with CMSs and preview content. So without further ado, let's get started with our first rendering method, server-side rendering.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro there, Dan. So with Gatsby 4, we really wanted to put developers in the seat of making a choice about not only how pages get rendered, but really about build time, right? So the first rendering method I want to talk about today that we added in Gatsby 4 is server-side rendering. This isn't new. We didn't come up with it. This is kind of how the web worked for a long time. If you've worked in WordPress and PHP, you've worked with server-side rendering before. And what we're doing is we're bringing some of the magic and some of the power that you get with Gatsby and the Gatsby framework and adding in the ability to render things on the server. So some of the reasons that you might want to use server-side rendering, or like, who is this really for? There's a couple of use cases, but like a lot of this has to do with building complex and dynamic websites. So if you've got kind of a dashboard or you have things where you need to be rendering secure content, you need to be rendering randomized content for A/B testing. This is really kind of this would be the tool you'd want to pull out for your toolkit there. When we send out the slide deck, there'll be some linked docs on to learn a little bit more, but you can go check out our docs now, and there should be some updated pages there for you to check out. So some of the use cases as we've played through, and if you followed along with our Gatsby demo days that we talked about on Twitter last week, you'll see we kind of like we worked through some of these interesting use cases that you might have for SSR, A/B testing, personalized dashboards, shopping cart abandonment. So kind of rendering that based on the user's information at the time, and then also real-time data entry to be able to kind of sync that to the server and report back. So without getting too much into the weeds on these, I wanted to do a little bit of a demo. So let me go ahead and share, and I'm going to slide over to my SSR demo.
And I would say, like at this point, Joel, we'd still say SSG provides a much better performance on the website.
Right.
But we understand that there are times when dynamic is needed.
Right. So there are issues around scale. If you read the blog post about Notion's blog revamp, they went with an SSR strategy there primarily for scale reasons, that they just have a ton of blog posts and want to be rendering those, kind of at runtime rather than at build time. And that's certainly an option. If you need to be rendering things for scale reasons at using that, it's totally fine. But again, SSG, we think that's really the way to build the most performant website. So you're going to lose a little bit in terms of performance when you're working with SSR. So to kind of give a quick example of how this looks, you'll see I just have a typical pages folder over here in my Gatsby project. There's actually a little project I built last week to actually serve a real need. We have some meetings where we want icebreakers. So I made a little app to randomize getting icebreakers out of a database and pulling those into a single page. So really quickly, to give you a quick overview of the code and how you'd get started. So I've got Gatsby 4. I'm using the @next to get the beta, and I'm using a new function that you can use on any page template in Gatsby, and that it exports a function, an async function called getServerData. And so getServerData is going to allow you to do things like go fetch data from a third-party API, do something interesting, access your API keys, do the kind of secure stuff that you only want to do on the server. And then this logic is not going to be run on the client. It's going to be run in the server, Gatsby Cloud, or wherever you might be hosting. So in this case, I'm using Supabase. I'm grabbing some questions from the database that haven't been used yet, and then randomly grabbing one of those and returning it as a prop here, which then server data becomes an option in my main exported component here. And so then I'm logging out that server data and also then returning the text on that question that I'm getting back. And so for like a little live demo of that, whoops, I did something wrong there. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. I hadn't touched this in a couple of days. We'll see. Live demos are always the best, right, Dan? Yeah, we'll run it on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We'll
Let's
that
overwrite the port for the next demo.
That's right. That's right. That should lead to like no complications at all. Best laid plans of mice and men. Anyone's a Robert Burns fan out there. All right, we'll let this load up here. And that should pop up on 8,000, I think. I zoom Chrome out of the way here. 8,001, I'm guessing. There we go. Let's try that again. Head over to our questions. And there we go. We are rendering. And so you see that every time I refresh the page there, it's pretty snappy. It's not a complex page, but it's a pretty snappy query from the database, grabs it, renders the page, and gives me back a nice static HTML. So the page itself is pretty performant. It's just that kind of like load time and render just depends on the kind of complexity that you might have. What is my VS Code theme? I saw a question there. Honestly, yes. I'm not entirely sure. Let me pull up. I think it's some. Oh, it's the wrong setting there. Make sure I'm in the right window. I think it's. I'd have to guess here. Let's see. Window. I think it's like tonight or something like that. I don't remember. I'll look it up when I'm not on the call here. All right. So Dan, if you wouldn't mind pulling the slides
just quick
back
housekeeping
up.
For sure.
Yep.
We definitely will be sharing these slides on email. So sorry about that in the housekeeping in the beginning.
Yep.
And yes, let me take over it. Sec. Difficulties. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I have so many windows open right now. It's not working.
Okay, a couple of good questions popped up here, so I thought I would try and address some of them in person here. So Caden asked, what's the difference between SSR and using Gatsby functions? So the main difference there is using SSR is going to guarantee that you return a static result with your server-side code. So your resultant page or the time to get the dynamic content is going to happen before the user sees it. You would use Gatsby functions when you want to do things on your page. So if you want to fetch a route, let's say submit data from a form, if you want to go fetch data in response to a user action, that's more when you would use functions to be kind of dynamic and in the moment, where you actually want to call that code from the client, but you want to do it in a secure way. So they both allow you to do secure dynamic functionality. It just depends. Do you want to do it before you render the page and send it to your user, or do you want to do it in response to something that's happening on the page? And again, the in response to on the page would be functions. The render time would be server side. Okay, let's see here.
All right. Next page rendering method is deferred static generation.
Yeah, so deferred static generation, this is kind of more in our wheelhouse. I think when we talk about static and static pages, we really would be recommending that folks use deferred static generation to create static pages that then live on the cache. So what is deferred static generation? This is a little bit more of kind of like new art, at least in our world, similar to some concepts that Netlify has been talking about. But this is the kind of the Gatsby way. So the idea is that you can mark any page, and right now it works in our create pages API. Soon should be working in the file system routing version as well. But you can mark any page as deferred, and basically that page will be skipped at build time. And then the first time that page is requested, whether it's by a user or a bot or whatever, Gatsby will then generate that page and send it back. So it's as if it's kind of rendering an SSR for the first time, and then sending that back to the client, and then it's cached. So there may be a little bit of a performance hit for that first user, but after that, it is stored in the cache for everyone else. So when is this useful? We really, honestly, we built this in response to working with some very large customers who are building large Gatsby sites. And at a certain point, you're just kind of paying the tax of having to build everything ahead of time. And especially as you're doing cold builds, like changing code, whatever that might be, those can end up being super long build times. So what we kind of worked with and did some research on was figuring out that there can be a whole bunch of your website that you don't necessarily care about building at build time. Instead, you want to defer that. You want to say, hey, I don't need that initially. I need the homepage. Maybe if you think you need e-commerce, I need my homepage, my category pages, and my top 100 products. And then everything else, I'm okay paying like having one user pay that tax instead of my whole development team or my content team waiting to push those changes up every single time. So you're kind of moving the time around a little bit, but also kind of like limiting the scope of the effect of those changes. So again, there'll be some docs that you can link to once we send the slide deck out with the recording. You can link to these docs from that slide deck. You can also go check out our docs to see those. So some of the use cases that we think about with deferred static generation, like if you've got old blog posts, right? You've got blog posts from 2015 about using jQuery to do X, Y, and Z, or like, hey, there's this new thing called React. You don't necessarily need to build those every time, or you don't need, you're not going to get a high amount of traffic on that. So maybe you would mark those pages as deferred. And so using the Create Pages API, you can use and the file system routing API as well. You can use logic to kind of determine that. If the slug of this post is older than you pick a particular date, you can do it based on the slug stem. So if I've got something in this category, but not that category, so you can pick different kind of methods to choose which pages will be deferred and which ones won't. And so again, kind of date published, sections of the website. Maybe you've got certain SKUs and certain categories on your e-commerce site. You've got outdated documentation, but you need it for kind of SEO purposes. You can kind of defer all that and not pay the build tax on that every time. Awesome. Let me jump into a demo here.
Sounds good. And I will just go through some of these questions that we can answer.
Okay.
Are there any plans to defer sourcing if using the Gatsby GraphQL source toolkit, or like, let's say, another sourcing plugin?
Great question. I would say that is definitely something we're experimenting with, something we've talked about. There's as kind of probably the next frontier for us to figure out is decoupling that, so we could make that deferred as well, and a little make that work in a way that makes sense. So that's definitely a possibility, but not something we're necessarily doing today. Okay, so I wanted to show this simple little contentful site that one of our devs has been working on and building for us. And you can see it's got 10 posts here. And in my Gatsby node file, where I've gone out to grab all my contentful posts, and when I render that post template, when I'm writing the create page API, when I'm accessing the create page API, I can now pass in an option called defer. And that's going to say, hey, skip anything where, and then this is kind of just the index of it is, less than 5, so I want to say, okay, I just want my latest 5 in this simple example. The cool thing about this is that because my page template is using Gatsby link, when the page gets loaded up here, you can actually see as I'm kind of going through, when I demonstrate my intent to load the page, it's actually, you can see over here in my terminal, it's actually building out those pages for me on the fly. So I'm actually even kind of getting away from that little bit of the tax, where then once I actually click into any one of these pages. Why is that not working for me here? It's prepping, so I'm in develop mode, so it's going to be it's going to be using a little bit of that dev SSR, but it's going to kind of prefetch that data for me. And in my production environment, that's going to be super snappy and loaded up for me. I think I might have something kind of funky going on there, but so anyway, that's DSG. It's the ability to kind of say, hey, at runtime, go fetch that page data for me and load up that page and then store it in the cache after that. So it's super snappy once it actually does get in there. All right.
For us for blogs, I know that we will definitely be using it. We have it on a staging server here on our own blog, but we'll definitely be using like the date stuff, which is really helpful in development. It's going to cut down on literally 50% of the pages that get generated at build time. So it's super productive on that side. And then obviously having the one hit to the request and then it be cached in persistence and like Atomic is what we were striving for, instead of having like kind of a non-atomic build that gets built slowly over time.
Right. Yep. That's exactly right. So the idea is that it's all atomic to the initial build. So maybe, Daniel, this kind of to your question, I think our initial approach here has been that the source data is true from the time of the initial build. So as if you build it on Monday and nobody accesses the page till Thursday, it's still going to be the content that was sourced on Monday, so that it's all part of that atomic build and there's nothing kind of funky happening or kind of unexpected content with that atomic build. So it kind of sticks true to that Jamstack principle of atomic builds. And that's not to say in the future we couldn't do something more interesting with that. But again, that might be a case, Daniel, kind of to your question, that like basically SSR would be kind of a way that you could get around that. And you might do some more direct data sourcing. And I think we have plans in the short-term future to introduce some of our syntax there to make that a little bit easier for devs to work with. All right, that's what I've got for my demo here. You can see kind of from clicking around now, like everything is snappy. Things are stored in the cache, even though they've been deferred. So it's kind of the experience you would expect on a Gatsby site.
All right, thank you for that. I have some questions. I think we can hit now. Let's do that. Is it doing actually, we'll start at the bottom. How do incremental builds work with DSG? Is there an endpoint in Gatsby that needs to be triggered to rebuild the page?
My understanding is like with the incremental build, especially in cloud, it's not going to trigger the DSG building until somebody actually goes and updates it. I don't know if I'm directly answering your question there, Fabian, but I think you don't necessarily need to use a different endpoint. We're detecting that when the endpoint comes in based on whether it's coming from a content source or not. So my answer there is I think it will kind of source the data and get it ready for you. So if, like, let's say you made a change that is, I'm trying to kind of think through the question a little bit on the fly here. If you're getting content updates to a page that is only done via DSG, it's not going to necessarily build that on the incremental build. It will defer it. And so in theory, should be a much, much quicker incremental build.
All right. How does SSR and dynamic generation impact what environments you can deploy on? i.e., will this work on AWS Amplify?
As I understand it, I don't think it will. I know that a few of our friends in the industry have started some work to make some like the features of Gatsby 4 work. My assumption is that today it won't work on Amplify, but I have not actually gone out and tested on Amplify.
All right. Is it doing everything, or is it doing every time, or once done for someone, it's not done for others? So I think what we're asking is, once a person goes, or if it loads in the background with Gatsby Link, is that loading for everyone or just that single user?
Once the intent is demonstrated on Gatsby Link, it triggers
just
the
one
DSG
user,
build.
correct?
Just one user. Yep. So only one person ever is going to have any kind of potential performance impact. Again, if you're using Gatsby Link and people are navigating to it that way, it's going to kind of prefetch it and kind of build some of that into even into the time between hover and click and load.
Yep. In the case of an e-commerce site where the client add new products every day, Atomic deploy takes 32 minutes now. What would be your approach in fixing this issue? Defer older product pages? I would say yes. There's also maybe some category work that you could do. You could defer certain categories that don't get hit, even new pages. The thing is, maybe you could also do the opposite. For things like news sites, or let's say like really trendy e-commerce, the actual new stuff might be the stuff you want to be loaded first, and the old stuff, or like the old stuff loaded first, and the new stuff actually be in the background. And that might actually be that the old stuff is accessed more, where you're just like adding new content that hopefully grows into that old like organic content that really ranks. You might want to actually defer an opposite. In this case, I'd probably just defer the old stuff though, if your new items that you're adding to this e-commerce are like the most pertinent to the end user. All right. Are there any plans to support cached SSR pages? That was actually left over from before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you can control the cache headers on your SSR page, so you actually have a bit of an ability to do that with sending cache headers back on the response from your get server data function. So you can set a time to live there.
All right. I think this is maybe a combo with the incremental build question. In case of server-side rendering, do we have to build our Gatsby site every time we update the content in CMS?
It depends how you go about doing that, right? So the way that SSR works today, I mean, you can do basically a kind of direct reach out and grab of content from your CMS. So in that case, no, you could just not set up a webhook. I mean, you could kind of go back to, to 10 years ago in web development, have every kind of page loaded that up, or kind of dependent on your slug, et cetera. You lose some of the value of SSG in that way, but you could set it up in such a way that if you were SSRing pages directly from your CMS, and you were reaching out, writing the glue code and doing that today, you certainly could do that, and then you wouldn't need to do a Gatsby build every time. We don't recommend that. We don't think it's probably a great performance experience, nor is it a great DX in terms of having to write all that code yourself. But that's if I'm sure there are use cases where that would be valuable. So.
All right. If we have CMS preview enabled, is the author content creator not paying the rendering price when they preview a deferred post page? I would say the price we're really talking about is that larger build time of like the cold or warm build coming from development. So like incremental builds, I would say have solved much of the problem on the CMS side, plus the deferred tax will only be like milliseconds to seconds. Whereas what we're deferring on the build time for a developer can save 30 minutes, can save 20 minutes, like it can save real amounts of time on that side.
Yeah. Yeah, the kind of long and short of it is our preview experience now is largely driven by incremental builds. So it's about as like the build time there is pretty tight. And DSG, yeah, I suppose there can be some cases where there's like a slight tax, but it shouldn't be much given that that's an incremental build. Okay.
All right, I think probably the last question here, then we'll move on, but it definitely is a big one. How or does DSG impact SEO performance? So for this one, I definitely think it's a case-by-case basis. On the whole, Google is going to take your site in many different kind of doses of lab tests. So with a lot of their web core vitals, they have real data, they have lab data. They're going to combo that over time and kind of build this like graph of knowledge about the site rather than just be once. So Google, in theory, every single time they could come and crawl your site, they could be getting a static version of the entire website. Even if that page was deferred, the tax can be paid by a single user that's non-Google, let's say on a Safari browser. And then Google would have that static page as they crawl it or as they gather data in the Chrome. So in that case, it's like a larger, I think, knowledge base, and it's not just a single. But on like the single case, DSG is going to be slightly worse on performance than SSG, but slightly better on SSR, because again, you're only getting paid by one person. So in 99.9% of the cases, you're going to have a static site for every single page, even deferred stuff. For just that one user, you're going to be deferred. So it's like a spectrum for sure. But we think that it is the best way to kind of play middle ball. All right, let's get back. We have only a few more slides, so we should be good, and then we can continue taking any questions. Let's see if I can find it any quicker. I can't. No, it takes up the whole screen. It's real hard to see. That's why. All right, you can see my screen now. Hopefully, use case is DSG. All right, so faster builds and deploys. This is the second part of Gatsby 4. It's less on the rendering side and much more on the actual getting it out the door. The first one is pretty big for us. It's parallel query running. And it's basically just the ability to run query running in a multi-threaded manner. So previously, the Gatsby build process, much of it has been single-threaded, if not really all of it has been single-threaded. What we've done previously in Gatsby Cloud, we have thrown, or we've had cores, or multi-cores that have done image processing. So image processing, we were able to do and run that in kind of a multi-threaded manner. That really helps with build times around large media sites, large publishing companies. But with this update, we can now do that same multi-threaded that we were doing on images. We can do that with your query running. So we're taking larger parts of the Gatsby build and trying to run it in a more parallel manner. This is going to be big for any large website that spends a lot of time of their build portion running this. We've seen build times get cut from 25, 30%. And that particular query running, we can cut it down 50, 75% based on kind of the plan that you're running on Gatsby Cloud or other cloud providers and how many cores you're kind of throwing at the problem. So it's a huge step on the build side for speed, and it's again kind of a journey for us to continue to multi-thread different aspects of the build. Next on this side is the deploy infrastructure enhancements we made kind of in the last month, which honestly, as someone who makes a lot of content updates to our own marketing site, has been like pretty life-changing for me. But we've done a lot of work on kind of our underlying platform. And with like the last month, we've seen deploy times drop like by 90%. So if you're on cloud, I'm sure you've noticed this as well. But it's all in our kind of, again, our impact on the delivery time. So getting something from a Git change or a CMS change to the actual end production site for an end user, that's like a combo of both the build time, but also the deploy time. And we've done a lot of work on the builds in the last, I think, 2 years with the product, but we had some work to do on deploys that could take anywhere from, let's say, a minute to 5 minutes. That's still time where you're not seeing it on the end user. And now, I mean, honestly, we have a 10,000 page site here at Gatsby.js. We normally deploy in under 10 seconds. It's just been wildly helpful for us publishing to just be more productive and see where things go. Do you have anything to add there, Joel? I know you got a lot of work yourself personally on this with PM.
No, I was super pumped. The team kind of knocked this one out of the park. I mean, we looked at the graph just recently of the average deploy time across all websites on Gatsby Cloud, and it just was like the kind of graph drop you can see from a mile away. So it was pretty cool. The average time is well under 5 seconds for every site. So that's pretty cool.
And then lastly is our content sync. This is something that we have done a lot of work on lately, but are continuing to do work. And this will probably be something we continue to update in Gatsby 4. But it deals with how content creators are viewing previews in Gatsby Cloud, but also how CMSs, think about sending preview content and kind of overlapping. So if you can imagine if you're in WordPress or Contentful and you're using a component that is a child of like maybe a page parent, if you click preview in the past, and really with any Jamstack solution, any static site like this, you're going to probably get rerouted to the homepage. It just doesn't really know where to place the content. With our new content sync, the API work we did, we now smartly place that content either on a parent page that it's attached to at current, or another component or another parent page that that component is attached to, that we can still view the information. So let's say you're working on a button in Contentful and you click preview. If that button is just pulled up in a window by itself, it actually doesn't have a parent right there. So again, most systems would just send you to the home page and say, figure it out from there. We're now actually going to go look if that button is connected to any other component. We're going to take the top tree of that component, and we're going to show you that so you can actually see what the button looks like. If you are on a child that does have a parent open, we're hopefully going to always open that particular page. So it's just a lot more reliable experience underneath the hood. And then we're also doing some work on the UI itself to enhance that. So if you've seen lately, there's little messaging around when the build is happening in cloud on the preview itself. And you can also share out that preview there. So again, there's just small things that we're doing on the content sync, or what we're calling content sync, that are around how we work with the APIs of each CMS. I think that's going to wrap it up for slide work today. Yes, it is. We are at the end of our slide journey. Joel, I think we can cover the rest of our questions here. If we have
Let's do it. There's some meaty ones. I've reached out. I've reached out to some engineers on some questions I wasn't certain on. So we'll kind of tackle those as we go. All right, let's maybe work kind of from the top down here. Will SSR, here, I'll kind of work through here. Will SSR work on Gatsby, only work on Gatsby Cloud, or can we use Netlify? So when I mentioned some of our friends who are trying this out, I know that Matt over at Netlify had got some early versions of DSG working, and I'm not certain on the SSR side, but they kind of handle a lot of stuff with their serverless functions. So I assume there's kind of something similar happening there. I can't speak exactly for what Netlify can and can't do. I know that it works on Gatsby Cloud. So if you want to try it out, you want to try out early access stuff, I definitely recommend giving it a shot on Gatsby Cloud. You always create a free account. You can use the SSR and the DSG stuff on a free account just to kind of test out as you need. All right, can we see the page result in the question page? Just curious. Let me see if I can find that before I share. Should be
say, yeah, go through it, make sure you don't have any secrets.
Yeah,
yeah. Push that on.
Yeah,
we can include it on the links in the webinar after we send it out, if Joel can clean it up.
That might take.
There's a question. There's actually two questions about migrating. There's one migrating from Gatsby 2. And I think that it would be addressed in our upgrade guide. There was another question if it's a large upgrade from Gatsby 3, and if there's a ton of breaking things. I haven't seen a lot of breaking things on upgrade. I've smooth sailed on some of the starters we worked on. Do you have any quick statement there?
Oh, you're asking me. Sorry, I was looking through my pages there. Can you restate the question?
Just the upgrade process from 3 to 4. It's pretty straightforward. There's not anything really groundbreaking. I would say it's actually smoother than 2 to 3.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely smoother than 2 to 3. We were able to kind of fit changes for ourselves on about just a single page in Notion. There's some deprecated APIs, and I think we're throwing warnings if you're using some of those deprecated APIs. You can find all that info in GitHub in our docs. Kind of explaining which specific APIs. So it's really if you've gone deep in some stuff with building plugins, with writing stuff in Gatsby Node, there may be some kind of issues you run into there, but for the most part, not overly burdensome.
Perfect. All right. There's a question about DSG working with page prefetch links. I think we actually covered that live, which is theirs because they asked that before we did our demo.
Yep. So it does the prefetch, which kind of hits that route, which engages the Gatsby process to say, hey, I need to like load up the page, the data for this page and render it. And so it kind of knows, and then it's got it ready in the cache for you when you go to hit it the next time. Let's see.
Will be there's a question about being possible to host Gatsby 4 on servers. I think we addressed that largely.
Right.
You can definitely run it locally, and again, you can make probably the SSR work somehow, but it's not supported currently by us.
Yeah, and we don't have I don't think we have like a like guide on that today. I think we'll probably get around to that the next couple of cycles here with our core team. But today we don't have the docs on that. We, kind of our main goal was like, make sure we've got it working, and we're, get to that state. So I don't think you can certainly use the kind of the standard SSG features. All of that will still work. But I believe you would, I don't think it would work on your own servers today. So if you were hosting on, EC2 and S3 or something like that, you might need a little extra work and some elbow grease to make that work. Okay. Lines are blurred more than ever between data and content. What rendering approach do you recommend for user data? So I think a big part, or one of the kind of main use cases I had in mind when we were thinking about SSR really was about like user data. So personalized user content is really a key piece. If you've got a dashboard where somebody's going to log in and you're displaying data back about their content or data within your app, that's a great spot to put that. And so that would be the place that I think would be like SSR would be the right approach for that. And platform database, it depends on what your use case is. I feel like I'm the last person in the world that ought to have opinions about databases. So it just depends on scale and ergonomics and all the stuff you want to use there. But there are plenty of great options. I mean, it feels like even in the last year or two, there's been an explosion of like new options and alternatives to whatever the status quo was 5 years ago. So it's, kind of world's your, I'll defer by saying the world's your oyster on that one.
All right.
Okay.
Tim has a couple questions about Drupal. I think one of them we can definitely answer. Ink will definitely work on the latest Drupal source plugin. So Tim asked, when I last tried incremental builds using Drupal as a source, it always thought all pages had changed. So it went through the full rebuild kind of the entire source. That was a problem. It has been addressed and fixed. One of our largest users uses Drupal, so we know that ink builds will work for you. So go check that out and check out how nice it is. Your content updates take 5 seconds for 100,000 page website. It's great. And the other question is about mapping body images and Gatsby image as far as in the code.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the data entity UUID piece. What I think the case is with Drupal, and we've had this with some, it depends on the scale, I think is the answer here. Like you want to use Gatsby image for performance, but you may run into an issue, and this happens with some larger sites, and it depends on the content management system, but oftentimes you'll kind of have an exposed CDN, Contentful, Shopify, and I believe Drupal offer this too, where you can just kind of directly access them there. But yeah, I think it kind of depends on scale. But yeah, our default answer would be yes, use Gatsby image. You're going to get the best performance out of that. How are concurrent requests? This is great. Peter has a question about concurrent requests to non-cached DSG pages. Actually, our team just shipped an update in the beta this morning to basically handle those concurrently. So they're handled as kind of separate worker queues. So as a request comes in, it gets dealt with. When the next request comes in, it's run in a separate queue. So you're never like stacking up requests on top of each other, but instead they're kind of handled. And when the page is ready, it gets pushed to the user that requested that. So it's handled in kind of an asynchronous queue there. So you're not ever kind of stacking up. Yeah. Let's see. DSG only available with websites supporting Gatsby Cloud, right? You're hosting on Firebase right now. Yeah, Patrick, I believe the Firebase probably wouldn't work. I know that, again, like I said, Netlify has put out an initial version to support the beta of the plugin. But so yeah, I don't believe it would work on Firebase today. Tim responded to about 3,000 images. That's great. I'm glad it's working at that scale. All right, the upgrade path question we talked about. Robin, I reached out
before.
Yeah, I reached out about the static images one. So I guess, and maybe if Robin in the chat, you could provide some more detail there. My guess is you're trying to actually pass like the image blob through as a prop and then put that there. I'm not sure what exactly would be protected, or if you're trying to kind of obfuscate something there, but I'm not sure I have enough context to understand the question there. And none of our engineers have gotten back to me yet, so I can't necessarily answer that question. Okay, so Daniel, we talked a little bit about the defer sourcing. Today, no, we're sticking with atomic builds, but we can see a future where everything kind of becomes a little bit more asynchronous. You're able to use kind of the power of the Gatsby data layer in a less atomic way, that it's a little bit more available on demand, et cetera.
The other one about that is that a lot of times you'll have pages with like multiple sources on that single page. So deferring, like I did the same thing. As soon as I found out about this, working on the marketing site here, I was like, yes, let me defer all WordPress pages. I don't really care about the blog when I'm working like locally or when I'm working on it. Let's just get those out of there. But then we rethought about it. We do have sections where like we'll bring in a WordPress block elsewhere in the site. And that would obviously like break on the per page basis and look a little wonky. So certainly it might be something we build in functionality, but we will have to like think about again how you would source multi-content pieces or on one page. But it's definitely a great question, and it's exactly what I was going to think too when I first started about this. All right, I think we've actually answered all the questions. This was a great chat with everyone. Thank you for attending. Joel, thanks for the demos and coming out and answering all of our questions. This will be sent out. We will try to link as much as we can in here. Also, if you have any other further questions on Gatsby 4, let us know on Twitter, and we can definitely continue this conversation.
Awesome. And
yeah, no worries. We'll stay here. I just stopped sharing.
Oh, you stopped sharing. Okay, lost my Zoom window. Yeah, I saw Pedro. You had a question there. I believe the answer is no, but I'll try and get an answer, and we can send that out with the slide deck. I think based on my understanding today, it doesn't. I think we'll probably release something in the short term that would allow you to do that, though.
All right, perfect.
Awesome.
Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Have a good one. Thank you.
All right, bye, everybody.